Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on post notifications so you will not miss a future video.
Welcome to the channel, The Tech Piano Player Kid.
A black background with white text that reads The Tech Piano Player Kid displays on the screen with the same text written to the right in Braille. What's up, everyone? The Tech Piano Player Kid here, and welcome to part 7/8. And the reason why I'm saying that is because the last part was, let's just say that, I don't know what happened. I think I was tired when I was editing these videos and stuff, so I forgot to, I accidentally place the two clips together instead of end to end. So yeah, that didn't go too well. So I'll just explain in detail, like not in complete detail, but I'll explain briefly what happens. So we know what happened in the last video. Basically, Soul knocked Scarlet out, which was mean. Then we basically go to King Genis, where they show the pocket watch and they believe it's the one. And so they show it to him. Then they are trying to get Luther to essentially tell the truth. So they go to Luthor, they show him the pocket watch, and essentially they're trying to make him confess that he just a lot of things. And obviously, you know, it's not me, it's this person, all that kind of stuff. And he has the memory serum. You know, Genis wanted to confess that Luthor wanted to use it on him, and Luthor basically says, yeah, because I wanted to, you know. And then, surprisingly, actually, Dr. Fulger comes to Luthor's rescue and essentially knocks them out, I guess you could say. That's the best way I can say it. And then Luthor gives the serum to Genis, and then they go to Scarlet, they get her out, and essentially what happens is they bring Scarlet to the event where where Ignis calls the Ruby Dragon, and he shows that he got 3 eggs and he got them coded, and again, it doesn't end up working because I think it's just a hoax that they say, yeah, you can code the stuff to make it undetectable. Either that or it only stays on for a while and the egg seller is not telling Soul this. But anyway, the dragon comes and Scarlet basically defeats the dragon and comes back down, and the people catch her because she was falling, because she used like this fire spell to help her get up there. And Soul basically got extremely angry, and I mean extremely angry, and yeah, didn't go too well. And he basically ripped the pocket watch from her belt loop, you know, like it was hanging from her shorts. Like he basically just like yanked it from her and took off. And Scarlet tried to go after him, but he teleported away. And then basically it just fades essentially, and the pocket watch is closed because Soul slammed it closed essentially. And yeah. Now we're moving on to part 8, which I do have recorded luckily. And warning guys, here's where it gets a little intense. It will get pretty intense because there's something that's going to happen and it's going to get pretty intense. So warning to users and younger audiences, this is going to get pretty intense.
Close to the sun.
All right.
Description: half a year passed.
Whoa! Half a year?
Description: the pocket watch clicked open.
Yikes.
Description: Luther peered down at his reflection in the watch. The watch was wrapped in a soft cloth in a box along with a broken teacup and other rusted knickknacks.
Knickknacks.
Description: Kane is standing in the doorway, looking at Luther with curiosity. He said, "Did you find it?" Description: Luther took the watch out of the box and held it up to Scarlet's father. Description: He said, "Yeah, this is the watch I lent Scarlet a while back when we both worked in the quarantine zone together." Back. Chapter 13. Description: Kane continued to look at Luther.
Yep,
Description: Luther placed the box with the rusted knickknacks back on the top shelf of Scarlet's closet. Description: He said, "Yeah, this is the watch I lent Scarlet a while back when we both worked in the quarantine zone together." Description: Kane continued to look at Luther with curiosity. He said, if you don't mind me asking, young man, was that watch special to you and my daughter? Description, Luther squeezed the watch before he placed it in his jacket pocket. He said, very special. I lost this watch and Scarlet was the one who found it.
Wait, what happened to Scarlet, though?
Description, Luther said, that's how we started talking to each other. We would share the watch afterwards because it reminded us of how we met. Description, Kane looked Luther in the eyes, but then quickly looked away. Description, with a disappointed look, Luther said, so I didn't think you'd be right, Mr. Ignis. Description, Luther looked up at the dark shelf of the closet and said, I thought Scarlet would have the watch on her instead of stowed away in her closet. Description, Luther sighed and said, maybe the watch isn't special to her as I thought. Description, Kane said, well, my daughter used to wear the watch. I think I saw it on her often. Description, Kane said, it's just, ellipsis. Recently I haven't seen it on her so I thought she might have put it away in her closet, ellipsis, for some reason. Description, Luther said, well, you were right, Mr. Ignis. Description, Kane looks worried. He said, you're not angry with her are you? I'm sure my... Description, Kane looks worried. He said, you're not angry with her are you? I'm sure my daughter has a good reason for stowing away that watch. Description, Luther paused. He took a deep breath and said, I'm not angry with her. Description, Luther said, I'm more grateful than anything to Scarlet. After meeting her, I felt so much less lonely in this world.
Whew.
Description, Luther
Intense.
said, Scarlet is one of the few people I feel like I could really trust. Description, Luther said, so, I didn't come just for the watch obviously. I haven't heard from Scarlet in a long time. She left one day and never came back. Description, Luther said, I came to find out how she's doing. Description, Kane smiled with relief. He said, good. My daughter could really use a friend about now. Description, Kane sighed. He said, listen, Luther, my daughter is unwell. Description, Luther looks concerned. He said, how so? Description, Kane sighed in frustration. He said, she's been obsessing over her finding her brother ever since he said he was going to kill himself and went missing. Description, Luther's eyes widened. He said, so is missing? Description, Kane said, do you know my son, Luther? Description, Luther said, not too well. Description, Kane looks relieved. Description, Luther said, I'm sorry to hear your son went missing. I'm afraid to ask, but do you think he actually killed himself? Description, Kane shrugged and said, I don't know. All I know is, something happened between him and my daughter at the Iconic Guild recruiting event. Description, pride in his voice, Kane said, my daughter saved everyone from the Ruby Dragon, Luther. I just wish I could have seen it with my own eyes. Description, Luther smiled, looking happy for a moment as he said, I'm sure Scarlet was amazing. Description, Kane said, so from what I know, my sweet one saved everyone from the dragon. Description, Kane began shaking his head as he said, then for some reason, my idiot son ran away and said he was going to kill himself. Description, Luther looks troubled. Description, Kane said, and my poor Scarlet has been searching for that darned son of mine ever since. Description, Kane looked Luther in the eyes, but then quickly looked away again. Description, Kane said, that's why I'm glad you showed up today, Luther. I hope you can remind my daughter that there is more to life than her brother. Description, Luther dug a nail into his palm. He said, sir, for Scarlet, I don't think there is more to life than soul. Description, Kane covered his eyes with one hand. He nodded and said, I know. Description, Kane waved his hand at the closet and said, even all the clothes she has in her closet are her brother's. She only wears Soul's clothes now. He still has her in his grasp even though he's not even my key.
Ah.
Description, Kane waved his hand at the closet and said, description, description, Kane waved his hand at the closet and said, even all the clothes she has in her closet are her brother's. She only wears Soul's clothes now. He still has her in his grasp even though he's not even here. Description, Kane said, this isn't even her room. It's Soul's old room. Description, Kane sighed and said, the only good thing about Soul's disappearance is that my daughter agreed to move back in with me. Description, Kane shook his head and said, it took a lot of begging. She didn't think Soul is likely to come back to this place. Description, Kane said, in the end she agreed, but I know it's only so she can stay in Soul's room. Description, Luther said, I'm very sorry to hear what happened with him, Mr. Ignis.
Yikes.
Description, in a disgusted voice, Kane said, my idiot son was bound to get himself killed someday. I just wish his body would turn up so Scarlet could give up hope. Description, in a pleading tone, Kane said, I hope your presence will help my daughter forget about her brother at least for a little while. She's become quite the loner after her brother ran away. Description, Kane shook his head and said, I'm constantly worried about her health and mental state. Description, Kane said, so please stay until she comes home? Description, Luther said, sure, I'm here to see her. I won't leave until I do. Description, Kane nodded, looking pleased. He eyed Luther briefly and said, good, good. Description, Luther said, Mr. Ignis, is there something on my face? You keep looking away from me. Description, Kane paused before he said, it's not your face, it's your eyes. Someone I knew had violet eyes like yours and it brings back bad memories. Description, Kane looked at Luther. He tensed up and a fearful expression spread across his face. Kane said, you don't happen to know a woman named Helena Reed, do you? Description, Kane said, I think my daughter mentioned Helena lived in the quarantine zone that she worked in. Description, Kane said, so I'm wondering if you know her too since you worked in the same quarantine zone as my daughter, Luther. Description, Luther paused. In a calm tone he said, I don't know Helena. I'm sorry my eyes bring back bad memories for you. Description, Kane looks relieved. He shook his head and said, for a moment there I almost thought you were Helena's son. Description, Luther said, did something bad happen between you and Helena, Mr. Ignis? Description, Kane said, I just thought we were friends. I think she's married now and has a new family, but I expected her to at least visit me once in a while. Description, Kane gazed down at the ground with a bleak look. He said, and she never did. Description, Kane swallowed hard and said, even now, after the quarantine zones have been abolished, she still hasn't visited.
What happened between the two?
Description, waving one finger in the air, Kane said, that's why I know you're not her son, Luther. You actually take time to visit your friends. Description, Kane said, and I'm sorry that my daughter left without saying goodbye or visiting you once in a while. Description, Luther said, I'm sure Scarlet had her reasons. Description, Kane smiled and said, how kind and understanding of you. It seems like my daughter made a good friend. Description, Kane said, say, would you like to come downstairs and wait in the living room for Scarlet? Description, Luther said, I will come down soon, Mr. Ignis, but can I have a moment alone to digest everything? Description, Luther said, I'm shocked by hearing what happened to your son and Scarlet's current state of mind. Description, Kane said, of course. Come down when you're ready. Description, after a moment, Kane said, but I hope you don't spend too long thinking about my son. He's not. Description, after a moment, Kane said, but I hope you don't. Twitter. Description, after a moment, Kane said, but I hope you don't spend too long thinking about my son. He's not worth your thoughts. Description, Kane turned around and walked downstairs, the sound of his footsteps fading as he got further away. Description, Luther sat down on the edge of Scarlet's bed and took out the watch. Description, he said, hey, I hope you have been well. Description, Luther eyed the top shelf of the closet. He sighed and said, it seems like Scarlet hasn't spoken to you much lately, if at all. Description, Luther looked down at the pocket watch. Description, he said, the quarantine zones have been abolished recently. Description, Luther said, it took a while, but my memory deletion serum worked. Humans are free now.
Yes.
Description, Luther said, my dad is pretty happy. He is leading the way in helping humans integrate back into the society. Description, Luther said, my mom is still adjusting to the new life we have outside the wall. She started looking for a job. Description, Luther smiled a little and said, Ash saw a Muffy for the first time. Description, Luther said, Walder never gave an official reason why the quarantine zones were being abolished so suddenly. Description, Luther said, even the Waldorians looked confused the day they let us out. Description, Luther said, but since there haven't been any new cases of people falling ill with the Waldorian disease, Olyncians are assuming that Walder caught and dealt with the culprit of the disease in secrecy. Description, Luther said, that's not far from the truth. Dr. Fulger was locked up and scheduled to be executed. Description, Luther said, but Dr. Fulger already escaped like I knew he would. Description, Luther said, he's hiding now. Janus is still hunting for him, so I don't think Dr. Fulger will have time for experiments anytime soon. Description, Luther dug a nail into his palm and murmured, a happy ending. Description, Luther paused and stared ahead, his gaze not focused on anything in particular. Description, a long moment of silence passed. Description, Luther said, I think Janus is unwell. Description, Luther said, it looked for a while that my serum worked perfectly, but I noticed Janus is making less and less public appearances. Description, he said, and when I broke into Walder to check up on him, I couldn't even find where he was or High Commander Valdem. Description, Luther said, it's like Janus is in hiding or something. Description, Luther shook his head and said, I never thought I would say this, but I want to see Janus. Description,
Really?
Luther looked back down at the watch and at his own reflection. Description, Luther said, maybe he's just feeling guilty about the Waldorian disease he started, but I'm just afraid there's something wrong with him. Description, Luther fell silent again. Description, Luther said, I got my meeting with the Masters finally. I wanted to tell them about Alvin and get their help in finding the first mage and fighting against Alvin. Description, Luther said, it didn't go well. Description, Luther said, the Masters want to leave Alvin to First Mage Ezra.
Well.
Description, in a frustrated tone, Luther said, but First Mage Ezra has had a lot of time to get rid of Alvin and Alvin's still here. Description, Luther said, but the Masters weren't convinced that the First Mage still cared about Alvin or that he may be changing his mind about banishing Alvin in the first place. Description, Luther leaned forward, his head down, his gaze on the ground. He sat quietly for a few moments, with an unsettled expression. Description, Luther took a deep breath. He squeezed the watch. Description, Luther said, it's really nice to hold the watch in my hand again. Description, Luther looked down at the pocket watch. Description, he murmured, Alvin.
Why did it pause?
Description, Luther swallowed hard, with a hopeless expression. Description, Luther closed the pocket watch. System message, connection. Description, the pocket watch clicked open. Description, Luther said, Scarlet, ellipsis. Description, he took a deep breath and said, I haven't heard from Scarlet since she went to the Icona recruiting event. Description, Luther looked up at the top shelf of Scarlet's closet again. Description, he ran his thumb across the watch surface. Luther said, I wonder what's going through her mind. Why doesn't she keep the watch with her anymore? Description, Luther shuddered. He said, I'm worried something did happen to her brother. She would never be okay again if Sol died. Description, Luther said, I'm afraid. Description, Luther took a deep breath and said, I'm afraid of losing her. Description, footsteps can be heard coming up the stairs. Description, Kane showed up in the doorway. He said, just thought I should check up on you. Do you want something to drink, Luther? Description, Luther said, I'm fine, Mr. Ignis. Thank you for... Description, Luther said, I'm fine, Mr. Ignis. Thank you for asking. Description, Kane nodded, but didn't leave. He said, so do you know why King Janus suddenly shut down all the quarantine zones? It was a surprise to all of us here when we got the news. Description, Kane said, all we know is the decision, but not why the king decided the zones were no longer necessary.
Huh.
Description, Kane said, you work there so maybe you know something more than the townsfolk here. Description, Luther said, Boulder didn't tell me anything either. Description, Kane sighed and said, that's too bad. Description, Kane said, if they let the humans go, I assume Boulder caught the culprit. I just wish they would let everyone know who it was. Description, Kane said, maybe it wasn't a human who started the Voldorian disease. Description, Kane said, I bet when Volder caught the culprit, King Janus was embarrassed to find out that they weren't human and that he locked up a bunch of humans for no reason. Description, Kane said, so Volder just let the humans go without giving anyone else other details or explanations. Description, Kane sighed again. He said, Description, Luther placed the
Ooh,
watch back.
sorry.
Description, Kane said, so Volder just let the human... Description, Kane sighed again. He said, well I suppose we just have to live without good closure on all of this.
I was yawning and then I touched the phone at the same time.
Description, Luther paused. He said, this isn't the ending I was hoping for either. Description, the sound of a door can be heard opening in the distance. Description, Kane said, that should be Scarlet. Description, Luther placed the watch back into his pocket and stood up from the bed. His heart is beating faster. Description, Kane walked out of the room and called out, a guest is here to see you, my sweet one. Description, Luther took a deep breath and followed Kane out of the room. Description, Scarlet is standing at the bottom of the staircase. She is wearing baggy clothes much too big for her. Description, her shoes are glowing red. Description, as Kane made his way down the stairs he repeated, a guest is here to see you, my sweet one. Is it Sol? Did he come back? Description, Kane grimaced. Description, Scarlet's eyes look sunken, with dark circles underneath them. Her red hair is dull, knotted and messy, like how that hasn't been taken care of in a long time. Description, Luther gazed down at her from the top of the staircase. He said, it's me, Scarlet. Description, Kane said, sweet one, you remember Luther, right? He told,
Whoops.
Description, Kane said, sweet one, you remember Luther, right? He told me that you and him used to work together in Volder's quarantine zone. Description, Scarlet looks horrified. She backed away. No. Description, Scarlet turned around and ran out of the house. Description, Kane looked utterly confused. He glanced up at Luther and said, what's going on, Luther? I thought you were my daughter's friend. Description, Luther said, Levidas Ultimus, like air. Description, Luther changed into a gust of wind, flying past Kane and followed Scarlet out of the house. Description, Scarlet had escaped into the forest around the house. As she felt the wind around her, she said, no, Luther, leave me alone. Description, Luther changed back in front of her. Scarlet ran into Luther and he caught her in his embrace. Description, Scarlet shook her head and pushed herself away from Luther. No, Luther, why did you come here? Stay away from me. Description, Scarlet wrapped her arms around herself. With a pained expression, she said, please, just go and never come back. Description, Scarlet dropped to her knees and covered her face. Description, tall trees surrounded the two. The sound of a river can be heard. Description, Luther looked at Scarlet
What
for a while.
happened?
Description, in a soft tone, Luther said, I see you have some new scars. Is it from practicing Flame Master? Description, Scarlet didn't answer. Description, Luther paused, a worried expression on his face as he looked at the scar on Scarlet's neck. Luther said, did you learn the spell? Description, Scarlet lowered her hands and gave a small nod. Yeah, ellipsis, I defeated the Ruby Dragon with Flame Master. So thank you, Luther. I wouldn't have been able to defeat the dragon without your help. Description, Luther said, I'm sure you could have done it without me. Description, Scarlet blushed at the sound of confidence in Luther's voice. Description, Luther said, so tell me more. I want to hear from you how you defeated the dragon. Description, Scarlet paused. She took a deep breath and chuckled a bit before she shook her head. I flew into the air, Luther. Description, Luther smiled and said, wow, you can fly now, Scarlet? I don't know if I want to do it again. It was such a crazy idea and I still can't believe it worked. I used Flame Master to blast myself into the air. And Flame Master also lets me sense the air around me. I was able to sense the dragon as I flew nearer to it, Luther, even though there was only air between us. Description: as Scarlet spoke, she leaned towards Luther. I was flying, Luther. Description: Scarlet covered her mouth for a moment.
This is weird.
I was flying. Description: Luther said, I'm so impressed, Scarlet. Given the way you sensed everything before, not being able to touch the ground must have been very scary for you. Description: Luther said, did you practice at all with flying before the fight? Description: Scarlet's expression and body both relaxed. Not at all. I just went for it and it was really scary. Description: Luther smiled and said, well, it sounds like you found another creative way to use fire magic again. Description: Scarlet laughed a little. Yeah, I didn't think I could fly, that's for sure. Description: Scarlet paused, looking surprised. Description: after a moment, she looked sad. I think this is the first time I've felt happy in a long time, ellipsis. Description: a troubled expression spread across Luther's face. He said, I heard about Soul, Scarlet. If he's out there, I can help you find him. Description: Scarlet swallowed hard and shook her head. No. It was, ellipsis. It was nice talking to you again, Luther, but you have to leave. Description: Scarlet wrapped her arms around herself.
Why?
I would like to be alone now, please. Description: Luther paused. He took out the pocket watch and said, I'll leave if you want, but I found the pocket watch in your closet and I want to take it with me for a while. Description: Scarlet looks surprised. You found the watch. Description: her voice sounded shrill and desperate. Description: Luther said, your dad helped me find it. Description: Scarlet reached out her hand with a desperate look. Give me the watch, Luther. Description: Luther said, why do you want the watch if you're just going to keep it in the closet, Scarlet? Give it to me. Description: Scarlet covered her mouth. I'm sorry, Luther, ellipsis. I'm sorry for shouting. You and our counterpart have helped me so much and I just tossed both of you away. I'm a horrible, cold-hearted person. Description: Luther said, Prime Video. Description:
Oops.
Luther said, I know you're not a cold-hearted person, Scarlet. That I'm still sure of. Description: Scarlet is trembling as she knelt on the leafy forest ground. I need the watch back, Luther. You can't take it with you. Description: Scarlet got up and reached her hand towards Luther. Description: Luther took a step back with the watch and said, it's strange you want the watch back when you're just going to keep it in your closet. The watch is going to come back to me anyways. Description: Luther said, Scarlet. Description: he said, are you afraid you would ask me to beg Alvin to save Soul? Description: Scarlet halted in place. She shook her head. No. Description: Luther said, is that why you're shutting out our counterpart and me? You're wrong, ellipsis. Description: Luther's voice is soft and gentle as he said, I'm not wrong. I can see how torn you are. Description: Luther said, you've thought about the possibility that if I go back to my timeline, then maybe Soul would still be here.
Why did the music pause? I don't like this.
Description: Luther said, but you're unwilling to ask me because you don't want me to get hurt in the process. Description:
I don't
Luther
like
shook his
this.
head and said, Scarlet, I can see that this is killing you. Description: Scarlet covered her face and started to sob into her hands. It's all my fault. I embarrassed Soul at the recruiting event and now he's probably dead because of me, ellipsis. Description: Scarlet uncovered her face and let her arms fall to her side. Her head is lowered and her shoulders are slumped. She sunk to the ground, looking defeated. And with each passing day, I lose more and more hope that I'll see my brother again. And I thought about it. I wondered how other timelines would have turned out for me and my brother. I wondered what would happen if you beg Alvin to return to your timeline. Would I still get to be at Soul's side? How can my heart be so cold to you, Luther? I know what you'll lose if you got back to your timeline. I'm a horrible person for even wondering what your timeline will be like for me and Soul, ellipsis. And it's not like, ellipsis. It's not like we know your timeline will end up being better for Soul.
Oh, go chill.
Description: Luther looked at Scarlet with concern.
Every time the music pauses, I don't like that.
Description: he murmured, but it might be. System message: Scarlet is waiting. In my timeline, Soul is alive, but you're dead. Well, I think you were brought back to life, but you and Soul are both working with Alvin. One of three response. I heard Luther say Alvin's name. Maybe he is already in my timeline. In my timeline, Soul is alive. Responded, in my timeline, Soul is alive. Description: Scarlet smiled. That sounds, ellipsis, nice. If I'm by, that sounds, ellipsis, nice. If I'm by Soul's side in the timeline, then it sounds nice. Description: a frightened expression crossed Scarlet's face. Luther, please go. Messenger: Luther, please go. And I don't want you feeling tempted even for a moment to beg Alvin to return to your timeline. You can return to a timeline where your parents are dead and you kill all the Voldorians. This is the timeline you must go on living in. Give me the watch, Luther, and leave. Never. Description: give me the watch, Luther, and leave. Never come back to me. Description: Luther said, I'm not going to beg Alvin even if you ask, Scarlet. Description, Luther said, you're safe to stay around me. We can find your brother together. Description, Luther paused. He said, thank you, Scarlet, for protecting me even though I can see it's killing you. Description, Scarlet shook her head. If you stay, Luther, I will lose my soul. I know I'll ask you to beg Alvin. I'm already responsible for killing my brother. If I ask you to kill your parents and all the Valdorians for my brother, then I will lose the last bit of myself that I like. The last bit that feels right. Description, Soul stepped out of the woods. He said, I knew it.
What?
Description, Soul said, it took a while, but I'm glad you finally showed me who you truly are.
What?
Description, Soul said, you're no different from all the other disgusting creatures that have betrayed me. Description, Scarlet looked stunned. She picked at the leaves on the ground with her hand. Luther, ellipsis, am I going crazy? Did I hear my brother's voice just now? Description, Luther-eyed Soul. Soul looks healthy, but angry. He is, description, Luther-eyed Soul. Soul looks healthy, but angry. He is sneering at his sister. Description, Luther said, I see him, Scarlet. Soul's alive. Soul's alive? Description, Scarlet covered her mouth. Her face immediately brightened. Description, Scarlet extended out her sensory radius. Soul, where were you this whole time? Description, in a harsh tone, Soul said, I'm not here to answer your questions. Description, Scarlet's sensory radius reached Soul. Tears came to her eyes. It doesn't matter. Description,
What?
Scarlet's sensory radius reached Soul. Tears came to her eyes. It doesn't matter. Description, Scarlet got up and ran towards him. You're alive. That's all that matters. Oh, I'm so happy you're alive, brother. Description, as Scarlet neared Soul to embrace him, he pulled out a dagger and plunged it deep into her.
What?
Description, in a low voice, Soul said, you failed my test, Scar. Description, Scarlet gasped as she felt her gut being ripped apart. Description, Soul said, why did you have to choose him? Description, Luther's eyes widened, looking shocked and disgusted at the sight in front of him. Description, Luther's breathing quickened as he said, what have you done, Soul? Description, Soul glared coldly at Luther and said, see what you did to my sister, Luther. You killed her. Description, Soul pulled the dagger out of Scarlet. She grabbed onto him for a moment. Description, Scarlet smiled. It's okay, brother. It's okay. Just be safe from now on, ellipsis. Description, Luther caught Scarlet before she slid to the ground. Description, Luther held Scarlet in his arms. In a shaky voice, he said, no, Scarlet, ellipsis. I'm sorry, Luther, ellipsis. Description, Luther tightened his embrace around Scarlet. So Luther and Scarlet with rage.
Every time why does every single path have to end up someone dying? I don't like this.
Description, Luther tightened his embrace around
I
Scarlet.
don't like this.
Soul glared at Luther and Scarlet with rage. Description, Luther shook his head and said, no, this isn't the end, Scarlet. You'll be okay.
What? What? Okay, sorry. I thought my dad was talking to me. Oh boy.
Description, Luther squeezed the pocket watch he is holding in one hand and said, trust in our counterpart. You'll be okay. Description, Scarlet closed her eyes, a smile on her lips. Description, Scarlet is dead. System message, Scarlet is waiting. Turn back time. The response shimmer, turn back time. The response shimmers green in response. Description, error detected. Description, time reversal void. Description, error detected. Description, exception detected. Description, exception accepted.
Exception.
Description,
Heh.
revival accepted. System message, reinitiating. 20 seconds. A palish blue dust.
I'm just speechless what just happened. What?
Responded, turn back time. Description, error detect. Description, revive. System message, description, Scarlet stirred in Luther's arms. Description, Luther said, Scarlet. Description, relief spread across Luther's face as he said, you're okay. Description, Scarlet placed a hand on her stomach. The wound is no longer there.
The wound.
Description, in a gentle tone, Luther said, thank goodness you're okay. For a moment I was afraid, ellipsis. I trusted in our counterpart like you told me and it worked. Description, Scarlet smiled. Do you have the watch, Luther? Description, Luther held the watch in front of Scarlet. He said, yeah, I'm holding it in my hand in front of you. Description, Scarlet felt for Luther's hand. Once she found it, she placed her hand over the watch. Thank you. Thank you for reviving me. System message. Scarlet is waiting. Always. I'm glad you're okay, Scarlet. 1 of 4 response. I can't believe your brother killed you. Does that change your mind about him? 2 of 4 responses. Button. Thank you for reviving me. System message. Oh, I can't believe your brother. I can't believe your brother killed. Response. Description. Scarlet paused. She shook her head and murmured, I love him. Description. Luther sighed as he helped Scarlet to her feet. Description. In a quiet tone, he said, I never wanted to come in between you and your brother, and now I'm afraid it's too late. Description. Scarlet shook her head. Luther, I hope you're not blaming yourself. If you didn't come see me, then I wouldn't even know my brother is alive right now. Description. Soul stared blankly at Scarlet. He looked down at his dagger. There was no longer any blood on it. Description. Soul ran a hand through his hair and murmured, what just happened? Description. Luther looked at Soul with a piercing stare. Agitation and disgust in his tone. Luther said, how could you? Description. Soul's face turned red at the sound of Luther's voice. In a bitter tone, he said, how could I what? Description. Luther squeezed his hands together. He looked away from Soul and took a deep breath without saying more. Description. Soul pointed his dagger at Scarlet and said, I know I killed you, Scar. How did you come back to life? Description. In the softest voice possible, Scarlet said, Soul, ellipsis, remember I told you that there was a human on the other side of the pocket watch that could revive me? Description. Soul placed the blade of the dagger on his lips. He said, no way. So there's actually a human that can revive you, freeze time and control dragons? Yes, Soul. That human is my counterpart. And Luther's counterpart as well. Description. Soul clutched his head. He said, how is it possible that your wacky, crazy story is actually real? Description. Soul said, so I was right about that watch. It is cursed. If only I could just burn it away from existence. Description. Luther took another deep breath before looking back at Soul. Description. In a suppressed tone, Luther said, without the watch and our counterpart, your sister wouldn't be alive right now, Soul. Description. Luther said, you may be angry with Scarlet now, but I'm sure you will feel her loss if she died. Description. Soul inhaled deeply through his nostrils. He scowled and said, I'm not going to be pathetic and miss some woman who loves another man instead of me.
Dude! You can't marry your own sibling. That's just weird and wrong.
Description. Luther said, you say that, but you have to see how much Scarlet loves you. And if you toss her away, Soul, you will regret it. Description. Soul said, I'm not going to miss her. Why are you even here, Luther? Do you actually love my sister back? Soul, ellipsis. Description. Luther said, it's clear your sister is important to me, but she loves you, Soul. Everything Scarlet has done, has been for you. Description. Scarlet blushed. She swallowed hard as she pressed a hand against her chest. Description. Soul eyed his sister and said, Scar, that whole thing about Luther's parents dying and him killing all the Valdorians, what's that about? Description. Soul looks infuriated as Scarlet turned towards Luther's direction. Luther, ellipsis, is it okay if we tell Soul the whole truth? Description. Soul said, why are you asking for his permission? You're not supposed to keep secrets from me, Scar. Description. Luther said, of course we can tell your brother the truth if you want to, Scarlet. Description. Scarlet looks relieved. Description.
Let's do that.
Scarlet looks relieved. Description. Scarlet held out her hand to Soul as she moved towards him. I'm so happy you're alive, brother. Let's go home. I'll cook you anything you want and I'll tell you everything. Description. Soul pointed the dagger at Scarlet again. He said, I'm not going anywhere with you until you can prove your love for me. Then tell me what you want, brother. Tell me and I'll do it. Description. Soul looked at Luther. He said, ask Luther to beg this Alvin guy or whatever and go back to the other timeline. Description. Scarlet stopped walking towards Soul. Soul, ellipsis, you don't know what that means to Luther. Please, let us explain it first. Description. Soul said, I'm not dumb. It's clear that begging Alvin is not good for Luther. Description. Soul waved his dagger at Scarlet and said, so, sister, if you love me, if you want to support me. Description. Soul said, show me you don't love him. Ask Luther to beg this Alvin person. Description. Scarlet froze, a horrified expression on her face. Description. Soul said, come on, sister, what's taking you so long? Ask. Description. Luther glanced at Scarlet. She is clutching her chest with both hands and trembling. Description. Luther eyed Soul and said, you heard our conversation, Soul. You know that I'm not going to beg Alvin even if Scarlet asks me to. Description. Luther said, so what's the point? I won't get hurt one bit by her asking, Soul. Description. Soul pointed his dagger at Luther now. In a shaky voice, he said, shut up, Luther. You're ruining my test. Description. Soul redirected his dagger at Scarlet and said, come, Scar, ask Luther to beg Alvin. Description. Luther took a deep breath and said, go ahead, Scarlet. Ask me to beg Alvin. Description. Soul said, shut up, Luther. Description. In a very quiet voice, with lowered head, Scarlet said, it feels wrong, ellipsis. Description. Soul said, make Luther beg, Scar. Description. Scarlet quivered. Description. Luther squeezed his hands into fists. He said, do it, Scarlet. Ask me to beg Alvin. Description, Scarlet paused. She shook her head. Never. Description, Luther's face is a mix of emotions. I'll never do anything that I know will hurt you, Luther. Because I need you to know that no matter how bad it gets, you'll always have me. Description, Scarlet raised her head in Soul's direction. Soul looks shocked, displeased and annoyed. Brother, please believe me that this whole thing with Alvin is very serious. I'd be asking for Luther to give up his parents and kill all the Voldorians. Even if Luther won't do as I ask, just the thought of asking him to sacrifice so much for me, ellipsis. Feels so wrong to me. Description, in a sadistic tone, Soul said, do it for me, Scar. Description, Scarlet wrung her hands together. No, I can't do this for you. Description, the hand that Soul held the dagger with trembled. He looked hurt. Description, Luther opened his mouth, but no words came out as he looked at Scarlet with gratitude and warmth. Description, instead of speaking, Luther took a step closer to her. Description, with a troubled expression and shaky voice, Soul said, so, you won't even pretend I'm your number one anymore, huh, Scar? Brother, please just give me a chance to explain everything. I'm sure if you hear the whole story about Alvin and what he did to Luther, you will understand. Description, Soul looked from Scarlet to Luther and back. Description, Soul said, you promised to tell me the truth about the human in this whole Alvin business, Scar? Description, Scarlet looks relieved. Of course, Luther and I will tell you everything you want to know, brother. Description, Soul grimaced when Scarlet said Luther and I. Description, Soul said, can this human revive anyone else besides you, Scar? I don't think so, ellipsis. Description, Soul looked at the dagger in his hand. He smirked at Scarlet. He said, even with Flame Master, sis, you still can't read someone's expressions. Description, Luther eyed Soul. He said, Soul, don't. Description, Luther said, Levidas Ultimus, like air. Description, Luther turned into a gust of wind just as Soul plunged the dagger into himself. Description, Soul pulled the dagger out as Luther reached him. Luther changed back and pressed a hand against Soul's wound. Luther, what happened? Did Soul do something? Description, Scarlet's voice sounded tense. She stood still, her sensory radius extending at Luther and Soul. Description, Luther propped Soul up and looked horrified as Soul's blood splashed down onto the leafy forest ground. Description, Luther murmured, Soul, why? Why not just kill me? Description, Soul scoffed. He said, like I want to see my sister cry for another man. Description, in an angry tone, Luther said, your sister loves you. Description, Luther shook his head and said, she loves you. Scarlet would do anything for you. Why do you have to hurt her like this? Description, the dagger in Soul's wound cut into Luther's hand, but Luther continued to press his hand around the dagger in an attempt to stop the bleeding. Description, in a weak voice, Soul said, she wouldn't make you suffer. Description, Soul said, I even gave her another chance and she continues to put you before me. You're
Dude.
rich. Description, Soul grabbed onto Luther's clothes as he said, if she doesn't want to make you suffer, then she deserves to suffer. Description, Luther sunk with Soul to the ground, while still pressing against his wound. Description, Scarlet's chest is heaving. She is breathing in and out rapidly. Luther, is my brother okay? Description, Luther shuddered. He looked at Scarlet with a fearful expression on his face, but didn't answer her. Description, Soul said, and this human that can revive, freeze time and control dragons is somehow involved with you too? Description, Soul said, this world is so messed up if you and my sister are the stars along with this human. Description, Soul said, I can't cheer for a world like this. It's a waste of my passion and time. Description, Soul said, this human better not be able to bring me back, ellipsis. Description, Soul laughed. More blood gushed out as he laughed. Description, Soul said, hey, Luther, it's your turn now. Are you going to choose your parents and the Voldorians? Description, Luther squeezed Soul's wound. Description, Soul coughed and laughed again before he said, or my sister. Description, Soul said, hey, Scar, you really killed me this time, ellipsis. Description, Soul is dead. Description, Scarlet moved slowly and carefully over to where Luther and Soul are. Description, she knelt beside Soul's body and reached out a trembling hand. Soul? Description, Scarlet swallowed hard as she felt Soul's wound, wet with blood. Description, she grabbed onto Luther. Luther, we have to help my brother, he's dying. Description, Luther paused. He said, Scarlet, he's dead. Description, Scarlet tugged at Luther's clothes, shaking her head. No, he's not dead. He was alive just a moment ago. I heard my brother's voice a moment ago. Soul can't be dead, ellipsis. Tell
Ugh, I hate this song. Like, not hate it like I never want to listen to it. Like, I hate it like,
the truth, Luther. Tell me, ellipsis, the truth, ellipsis. Description, Luther took a deep breath. He said, I'm so sorry, Scarlet, but Soul is dead. Description, Scarlet's shoulders curled over and an animal-like sound escaped her lips. Description, she crumbled on top of Soul. Please revive my brother. Please revive him like you revived me. Description, Luther looked down at the pocket watch in his hand. He said, I'm not sure a counterpart can revive anyone else besides Time Crests. Description, Scarlet swallowed hard and tried to drag Soul up. Come on, Soul. Let's go home, ellipsis. Come on, ellipsis. Come on, ellipsis. Come on, ellipsis. Description, her voice grew weaker and weaker. Description, she bent over and buried her head into Soul's dead body and started sobbing. Description, the forest is quiet around them. Even the sound of the river seemed to have stopped. Description, Luther can only hear Scarlet's pain, anguish on his face. Description, Luther placed a hand gently on Scarlet's back. He said, I'm so sorry, Scarlet. Description: he swallowed hard and said, I wish I could bring your brother back and make all this pain go away. Description: Scarlet sobbed. Luther: please beg Alvin to bring my brother back. Description: Scarlet froze. She clutched her chest. What did I just say? Description: Luther glanced at Scarlet in silence, emotion fading away from his face. No, I didn't mean that. Description: Luther lifted his hand off of Scarlet's back. With a bleak expression and tone, he said, it's okay, Scarlet. Description: Luther said, you did nothing wrong. Description: Scarlet looks horrified. Luther: ellipsis, I didn't mean, ellipsis. Description: Luther looked down at the watch. He said, will it be better for Scarlet in my timeline? Description: Scarlet swallowed hard. In a trembling voice, she said, who are you talking to, Luther? Description: Luther closed his eyes before he raised the watch to his lips. Description: Luther said, Alvin, will it be better for Scarlet in my timeline? Luther: ellipsis, I didn't mean. Description: Luther took a deep breath and moved away from Scarlet as she tried to grab for him. Description: Luther said, please let me join you. No. Incendiatos Ultimus, Flame Master. Description: Luther felt heat being sucked away from him. Description: he said, Alvin, I beg you, take me back in time. Read message: very well. System message: Alvin is manipulating time. 4 hours, 22. Skip timer for 1 skip. Back. Chapter 3. The current year. 1,240 timed crystals. Buy more time. 1,240 timed crystals. Notices. 4 hours. Skip timer for skip time alert. Not can't buy more. Purchase one skip crystal for 6. Purchase one alert. Can't buy. Alert. Success. Okay. Close button. For system message. For skip timer for 1. Skip timer for 1 skip crystal. You have 0. Back. Chapter 14.
All right, guys, we've finally made it to chapter 14. That was probably the longest chapter ever. Wow. Okay. So let me explain what just happened. So that was a lot to take in. Okay. So Luther found Scarlet. No, let me rephrase that. So Scarlet came home and basically said, no, don't follow me. And Luthor followed her into the forest. They were talking and Soul stepped out. Basically, he was there the whole time. Then he killed Scarlet, unfortunately. Then we revived Time. Scarlet came back to life. And before Luthor could stop Soul, Soul basically killed himself, which killed Scarlet, not physically, but mentally, because, with sadness and everything. And Scarlet tried to stop him with Incendiatos Magnus Flame. What was it? Flame. Whatever it was. And she didn't make it in time. And Alvin said, very well, I will let you join. So I'm hoping that we can make it back to where Luthor can get Zoe out of there, but I have a feeling that's not going to happen. So we will see what will happen in the next video in chapter 14. So that's it for today's video. If you guys have any more questions, please put them down in the comments below, or you may send them to info@thetechpianoplayerkid.com. You can also give me a text at 913-312-1325. And if you do not live in the United States, you can text me through WhatsApp and give me a call there as well. I also have a toll-free number that you can use to give me a call at 877-318-8775. Please also follow me and like my Facebook page, The Tech Piano Player Kid, and follow me on Twitter, tech_piano. And you can also join my discussion forum on my website where you can ask questions about technology and help to answer questions about technology for the blind and stuff like this by going to thetechpianoplayerkid.com and clicking on the discussion board page underneath the navigation bar menu where you can register for a free account and help to answer questions and ask questions if need to be. Please make sure that you get permission from your parents if you still need to do so before making an account, just to make sure that you're on the safe side and that you don't want to get in trouble, because we don't want that to happen. And you can also subscribe to my monthly newsletter if you wish by going to my website, thetechpianoplayerkid.com. Again, if need to be, get permission from your parents just to be on the safe side. And you can unsubscribe at any time if you wish, and you have any trouble with unsubscribing or creating an account or deleting your account, please let me know, and I will do my best to help you out. Anyway, that's it for today's video. God bless you all, and peace. The Tech Piano Player Kid is out. Thank you for watching today's video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications, and leave a comment down below. For questions, please send an email to info@thetechpianoplayerkid.com. You can also give a call or text at 913-312-1325. And don't forget to like my Facebook page, The Tech Piano Player Kid, and follow me on Twitter, tech_piano. Black background with white text that reads The Tech Piano Player Kid displays on the screen with the same text written to the right in Braille, then fades to black.